art is a tool for thriving in difficult situations. As the Inspiration Arts Group celebrates its anniversary, I want to honor women artists and patrons who've continued to inspire us. I'm Tilly Strauss. I'm an artist and historian living in Dutchess County, New York, and I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. We'll start. Okay, this is a party with art history. I love art history, and I love researching, writing, and creating the little illustrations, but a partner in presenting these stories could be more engaging. If you love history and would possibly be interested in collaborating on the next, I think it's in September, presentation, contact me at my website, tillystudio.com, with suggestions of 2 artists. The artists need to have a birthday or a major milestone in September that we can all celebrate together. And so go to my website, contact me, we can discuss the possibility, and let's do this together. Keep history or her story alive. She screams for ice cream, summer birthdays, and cool treats. This is going to be a celebration of creativity, courage, and ice cream. These are women artists and patrons I never learned about in art school. And so much of art that I was taught was about male artists, the lone genius. And I wondered how I could possibly be an artist without the support system of having a wife. So learning these histories and finding people that I can somewhat identify with has been empowering. Tonight, we're going to focus on 5 women who defied political strife, put art to use, and made choices and faced challenges that still teach us today. All right, here's the timeline of where and when we'll be traveling. So I have one matron in Russia, Catherine the Great. She was a powerful patron who shaped the national identity through the arts. And I have 2 artists from Poland. Now, Poland was a major national, sorry about the noise in here. I've got a family running through the room. Poland was a major nation in the 1500s, and before and since has suffered from wars and upheavals, constricting and expanding borders, and social upheaval, and just last week, kind of a shocking election. So one of the artists is going to become a refugee and have to leave Poland, and the other one will stay in Poland and become an international star. The other 2 artists I want to talk about are Americans, and one uses her camera to fight for social justice during the Great Depression. And the other, she's still alive, is working and has been working, a big iconic figure in challenging sexism in the art world. So I did have an epiphany after I was researching these, and this is kind of strange. I don't know if this is, but each one of these women had a major upheaval or a loss or trauma in their teenage years, which I thought was interesting. And all of them changed their name at some time. It was like they reinvented themselves. And I thought that there was something perhaps more unique to women than to men. So let's go ahead and get started here. So German-born and fiercely ambitious, the Catherine the Great rose to become Empress of Russia through political savvy, personal charisma, and tireless self-reinvention. She was actually born Sophie von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, and she was the eldest daughter of an impoverished Prussian prince and a mother with a really a noble lineage that opened doors for all sorts of alliances. When she was just 15, she was summoned miles away from home to Russia by Tsarina Empress Elizabeth, who was the daughter of Peter the Great. Now, the Tsarina was unmarried and had no children and had picked her somewhat awkward nephew, Peter, to become her heir, and she was looking for a bride. Catherine, at that point still Sophie, she traveled there, and through her well-schooled, calculating mother, having taught her some social mores, and her sort of ability to meet courtly expectations impressed Elizabeth a lot, not necessarily Peter. But their marriage happened anyway in August 21st of 1745, and that marked Sophie's transformation into the Grand Duchess Ekaterina, or Catherine. The union remained cold, and most historians agreed probably unconsummated due to Peter's disinterest and immaturity. But for her birthday, one might imagine Catherine not savoring just a bowl of ice cream, but a banquet of ice cream in dazzling varieties of flavors and in glittering containers. She was a lover of ceremony and symbolism and understood the psychological power of abundance. For a nation yearning for order and majesty, Elizabeth signaled taste, control, and imperial magnificence. All right. Catherine was a lifelong learner, a prolific letter writer, and also an insatiable enthusiast for arts and ideas. She was bored with the shallow entertainment of her husband's court, and so she withdrew into study, finding a deeper purpose in books and debate and a steady stream of letters to Enlightenment thinkers all across Europe, such as Voltaire and Diderot. Each morning, she actually devoted up to 5 hours writing, and she diligently learned the Russian language in all the regional dialects, understanding that fluency was key to both her political power and cultural belonging. She also found stimulation in spirited debates with religious leaders, and she eventually converted to Russian Orthodoxy, not just as a political necessity, but as a demonstration of her loyalty to her adopted nation. The other thing she loved to do was take daily rides on her beloved horse, Brilliant. But they were more than just leisure rides. They were strategy, because these excursions offered her a firsthand look beyond the gates of the palace. And crucially, they earned her the trust and admiration of the royal guards. Going back 1 second there, I wanted to say that in 1762, at age 33, Catherine made her boldest move. And with the support of key ministers and those very same guards, she orchestrated a coup to dethrone her husband. His unpopularity and frankly dangerous foreign alliances kind of scared the nobility, and so they were behind her. Now, Catherine seized the moment that the nobility were kind of in disarray about him and the crown, and entered in the golden era of the Russian imperial power and Enlightenment reform era. So, okay. Though she expanded Russia's borders through war and diplomacy, Catherine's ultimate vision was one of enlightened peace, anchored in culture, education, and national identity. She was generous towards her military, yet she turned most of her energy toward building. She wanted to build a more refined and orderly Russia, and so she commissioned architecture, portraits, painting to elevate the empire's cultural reputation on the European stage. As a true patron of the arts, she amassed an extraordinary collection of paintings and antiquities at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, and that would become the foundation for the today's Hermitage Museum. Now, Catherine also saw urban planning as a civilizing force, and she sketched out entire cities, codified the civil service, and rewrote laws to reflect her evolving Enlightenment ideals. An author in her own right, she penned plays, books, and even an opera. And she tirelessly produced pamphlets and educational materials designed to improve the literacy across the nation and expand access to learning, especially for girls. Under her rule, schools for young women were founded for the first time in Russian history. Perhaps most powerfully, she modeled the image of the benevolent caretaker. When smallpox threatened the whole country, she led by example and got the vaccine publicly and championed the distribution across Russia. And in this and in so much else, she wielded power with theatrical flair and genuine purpose. Catherine reigned during one of Europe's most intellectually charged eras, the Enlightenment, as well as the turbulence of the French Revolution. Rather than shrink from the tides of change, she embraced them, surrounding herself with French and Italian advisors and immersing herself in the art and ideas of the time. She wrote, "I'm one of those people who love the why of things," a phrase that defines her voracious curiosity. And that curiosity fueled a magnificent spree of cultural acquisitions, she didn't just buy one painting, she would buy whole collections of paintings, and artwork, which were made possible probably because of the French Revolution. Her first major purchase of over 200 paintings included paintings by Rembrandt and Rubens, but she soon expanded that to include over 4,000 drawings, rare books, elaborate mechanical devices. One of the most, she had a mechanical table that she loved, these automatons, they were called. She had a mechanical table in her private apartments that would lower through the floor down to a kitchen where they would change the menu and everything, and then rise the table back up. And in this way, she was able to entertain privately without even any servants in the room. But one of the most astonishing marvels is the peacock clock, and I have a picture of it there on the right. It's a dazzling automaton that was crafted in London, shipped to St. Petersburg, and it took years to put together. And it's got a life-size owl, peacock, and rooster, and it still performs today. It's amazing. Centuries later, 2 centuries later. But I just want to say that these acquisitions of hers weren't just for her personal delight. They were a declaration for Russia. She was going to say that Russia under her rule was not just about might, but it was about the mind. For Kath, yeah. Did we get to this one? Okay. For Catherine the Great, collecting wasn't just about connoisseurship. It was a form of soft power. And so the way she did it, she understood the propagandist value of material collections. So she commissioned metalwork and porcelain and glass and books and religious objects to create this vast narrative of Russian imperial cultural refinement. She was one of her biggest and most impressive gestures was a silver service for each of her governors across the country. It was the largest commission of the 18th century to ever happen. So she commissioned a silver setting for 50 people for each of the governors that was designed with her little monograms on it and spread across Russia. And in this way, she reinforced loyalty through luxury. And even in the church, her presence was felt. There's the flask down below. She basically created objects or commissioned objects to be created for liturgical worship. And in many of them, she ordered the designers to take gems from the Byzantine old treasures and recast them. And in this way, she sort of melds her modernism, her modern rule with the sacred legacies of Russia's past. Now, she was affectionately known as Matushka, the mother of the nation, and she carefully curated her public image as both an enlightened ruler and a maternal caretaker. In 1774, she commissioned one of the most spectacular porcelain projects in European history, the Green Frog Service. I've done a little drawing of it there. It was produced by the English firm of Josiah Wedgwood, which was a 15-year-old firm, and he was called Potter to the Queen. This set included 944 pieces, 680 for dinner, and 264 for dessert, and it featured hand-painted English landscapes of 1,222 British views. It employed over 30 artists to do it. Wedgwood was a master at marketing, and so before shipping it to Russia, the service was put on public display in London, and it filled 5 rooms, and it drew crowds who paid to glimpse. Each piece was numbered and corresponded to a printed catalog for Catherine, a detail that reveals not only her organizational zeal, but her commitment to art as a record, as spectacle, and as a powerful political tool. Now, Catherine's beloved St. Petersburg wasn't just her residence, it was her message. This glittering European-facing city on the Neva River signaled to the world that Russia was no longer a distant empire, but a refined cultural capital on par with Paris or Vienna. Now, her most enduring gift to the city and to the world is the Hermitage Museum, a sprawling complex of buildings now housing over 3 million works of art. It began as a private collection, and the term museum was borrowed from her friend Diderot's encyclopedia, which was a revolutionary Enlightenment text published in 1765, and it shaped Catherine's thinking. When she heard that Diderot was having financial trouble raising money because he had to pay a dowry for his daughter to get married, she quietly went in, sent advisors to Paris to buy his whole library. But she said to him, to Diderot, "You keep them for a while. Just keep them there until I need them." And she put him on an annual salary to be her librarian. And in this way, I just think that's a great story because it shows how Catherine ruled with just empathy, and she knew the power, how to balance power and generosity. And she was only 36 years old at the time. So Catherine's legacy lives on in the imperial aesthetic. And if dessert can be a form of diplomacy, Catherine knew its power. From frosted cakes of diplomatic banquets to 944 plates of Wedgwood porcelain, every sweet gesture was layered with intent. She built bridges through beauty and ruled with art and sweetened the empire with spectacle. So, now let's talk about another artist, Tamara Lempicka. She was actually born Maria Gorska in Warsaw, and she emerged from the heart of the Polish cultural elite. Raised among wealth and refinement, her early life offered both privilege and pressure. Both she met with flair. By age 13, she had been sent to Swiss boarding school, where she grew quickly restless, and being ever theatrical, she feigned an illness, and her grandmother came to the rescue and took her out of school from that point on, and they traveled all across Europe. Most significantly, they went to Italy, where Tamara got her first taste and fell under the spell of classical art and architecture. Though she would go on to live and work primarily in France and the United States, Tamara never shed the icy boldness of her Eastern European roots. Her later works, often polished and stylized portraits of aristocrats, actresses, and wealthy patrons, became iconic of the Art Deco movement. They were cool, geometric, and utterly glamorous. So for her birthday, I think a perfect bowl of budin. It's a rich, velvety Polish custard made of potato starch and sugar, stirred into simmering milk, and it thickens like silk. You serve it chilled in a small porcelain bowl with a swirl of homemade fruit syrup or some shavings of chocolate. It's a dessert that looks understated until it hits the tongue, which is kind of like Tamara herself. Okay, her and her grandmother traveled all across Europe and ended up for a time in St. Petersburg. And during that year in 1915, Tamara became the belle of the ball. It was the height of the social season. And in 1916, at age 22, she marries Tadeusz Lempicka. And he was a dashing Polish lawyer born in St. Petersburg. She adopted at that point the name Tamara Lempicka. and she stepped into what seemed to be a life of security and status. But history would intervene, because what happens the next year? The Russian Revolution. And that swept away all the social order. December of 1917, Tadeusz is pulled from the house, dragged from the house, and imprisoned, possibly because of his connections with the Tsar's secret police. Tamara's response was fearless. She scoured the prisons for days and eventually bargained with the Swedish consul, offering her favors in exchange for her husband's release. They first went to Copenhagen and then London, and finally they settled in Paris, where the Gorska, Tamara's family, had taken their refuge. For a while, they survived on a sale of family jewels, but the hardship lingered, and Tadeusz seemed unwilling or unable to find work, and he grew distant, while Tamara gave birth to their daughter, Kizet, in 1919. Well, with little left to lose, Tamara decides, I'm going to be a painter. And her sister encourages her, so she signs up to study under Maurice Denis and go to the academy run by André Lotte. The result of her studies there is a style all her own. It's a fusion of late Cubism, sharp geometry, and the smooth sensuality of the neoclassicist painter Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. So this fearless aesthetic of hers, which born of exile, ambition, and reinvention, would come to define the visual language of Art Deco. Now, Tamara painted a new kind of man and woman. She painted men and women as icons, almost as architecture. She had a big following, and a lot of people commissioning her who were intellectuals, artists, scientists, writers, industrialists, and a lot of them were exiled nobility from Eastern Europe. She had no time for miracles. Her success came from craft, character, and relentless self-fabrication. She began selling her work through the Gallery Colette Velle and through the juried salons of Paris. Now, her painting, Portrait of a Young Lady in Blue, is a luminous portrayal of her friend and rumored lover, Ira Perrault, who was a singer. And it marked a turning point. With sculptural volume and sleek geometry and theatrical light, Tamara built her signature aesthetic. She had used bodies as architecture and elegance with an edge. She rejected softness. Her women were sensual, sleek, and commanding, flappers with a mythic presence, and her style caught the spirit of the roaring 20s. Now, a major patron, Pierre Boucard, commissioned her to paint portraits of his family, and thus granted her financial freedom, and she was finally able to buy a home and a studio on the left bank in Paris and outfit it in peak Art Deco splendor. Her true breakthrough, though, came in 1925 at the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts, the very show that would give Art Deco its name. American journalists took note, and soon Tamara's sleek, elegant portraits were gracing the pages of Harper's Bazaar and fashion spreads across Europe and the US. So Tamara didn't wait to be discovered. She constructed herself, one gleaming canvas at a time. She didn't dabble, she devoured. She was a tireless worker. She often painted 9 hours a day, sometimes squeezing in 3 separate sessions with models. For a major exhibition she had in Milan, she produced 28 paintings in under 6 months. So she had a strict ritual. As she would have the brush in her hand early in the morning, the models would rotate through like clockwork, and the evenings were capped with champagne, a bath, and a massage. It was a rhythm of self-discipline and self-indulgence. Tamara was notorious for her appetite for pleasure. She loved parties, alcohol, cocaine, and cigarettes. They were all part of her orbit, and she seduced both men and women, many who appeared in her canvases. In 1928, she officially divorced Tadeusz, and that same year she was commissioned to paint the mistress of Baron Raoul Kuffner, a wealthy Austro-Hungarian art collector. The portrait was famously unflattering. The mistress vanished from the picture, literally and figuratively, and Tamara stepped in her place. Well, in 1933, when the Baron's wife died, um, he and Tamara were married. And she was then called by the press the Baroness with the Brush. And it was a title she adored because it was part aristocrat, part rebel, and all self-made myth. Now, as fascism was rising in Europe, Tamara showed sharp political instincts. She convinced her husband to sell off his Hungarian estates and move all their finances and fortune to Switzerland. So beneath the glamour, she remained strategic, survivalist, and fiercely independent. As World War II erupted in 1939, Tamara, her daughter Kizette, and the Baron fled Europe and landed in Los Angeles. There, her glamorous style captivated Hollywood stars and earned her the title Favorite Artist of the Stars. And her work found homes in galleries from LA to San Francisco to New York. In 1961, the Baron died suddenly of a heart attack. And in the wake of his death, Tamara sold many possessions, and she got on a ship and went around the world 3 times, earning both freedom, of course, but time for reflection. And in 1978, she moved to Cuernavaca, Mexico. On March 18th, 1980, Tamara Lempicka passed peacefully in her sleep, and honoring her wishes, her ashes were scattered over a volcano, Mexico's second highest peak, a final act as dramatic and poetic as her life. Now, Tamara Lempicka's portrait of Marjorie Ferry was the first female painting to be on the cover of Christie's magazine. It was estimated to sell between $8 and $12 million, and it sold for $21.2 million in 2020, placing her among the top 10 most expensive works by a woman artist ever sold at auction. She's remembered as a trailblazer of Art Deco, a fearless woman who challenged tradition and embraced the daring energy of modernity. Her life was marked by upheaval, twice forced to flee political turmoil, from the Russian Revolution to the shadow of World War II across Europe. Yet somehow, with remarkable resilience, she rebuilt her career time and again in Paris, in LA, and in Mexico. Now, her art continues to inspire and captivate, displayed in institutions like the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Nantes and the Pompidou Center, and is treasured in private collections worldwide. Like a rich dessert savored slowly, Tamara's story invites us to taste the bold flavors of reinvention, passion, and unyielding creativity. So let's raise a cone to Dorothea Lange. She was actually born Dorothy Margareta Nutzhorn in May 26, 1895. She would have turned 130 just a couple weeks ago. And what better way to honor her than with a scoop of nostalgia? The classic ice cream cone was popularized in the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, and it was making its way to Brooklyn's street vendors just as Dorothy was growing up. So you can picture a little girl with a limp and a lot of grit strolling those streets with a cone in hand. Now, Dorothy's early years were tough. At age 7, she contracted polio, and it left her with a lifelong limp. But she later said that illness was the most important thing that happened to her. She said, "It informed me, it guided me, it instructed me, and it humiliated me." And then, at age 12, her father walked out on the family. He disappeared completely, and that rupture never healed. But it led her, by 1918, to drop his name and take her mother's maiden name, Lange. It was a quiet but powerful act of self-definition. At 17, Dorothy landed a job as a receptionist in a studio photographer's, Arnold Gante. Though hired as a receptionist, She quickly picked up other essential skills like proofing, retouching, and mounting prints. And she'd never cared much for school. So she kind of announced to her family that she was going to be a professional photographer. In 1917, she was able to attend Columbia University and some classes by the photographer Clarence White. He was a photographer known for his focus on everyday subjects and his influence on Dorothy would stick. And Dorothy was already seeing the world differently. Her work often reflected abandonment. There's empty streets, stripped landscapes, and she captured the tension between despair and resilience. This is one of her most famous pieces that almost everyone knows. Well, what happened in 1918, she set out to travel the world with a friend, and she was going to fund the trip with selling photos. But she ran out of money in San Francisco and ended up staying there and finding work. A year later, when she was 24, she actually was able to open her own photographic studio. It was a portrait studio. And it was in there that she met the Western wilderness painter, Maynard Dixon, who was 23 years her senior. They married, and through him, she was introduced to the bohemian art scene and the Southwest. He took her to the Hopi country, and she took photographs there. And living outside of Taos, they had two sons in 1925 and 1928. And she juggled motherhood with her career, balancing art and diapers. It was during a camping trip, Dorothy said, that a thunderstorm happened, and she had this epiphany that was like that she should not be just taking photographs of people paying for their portraits, that she should be out there taking photographs of real people. So, of course, that was the summer of 1929. The fall, the stock market crashed, and she ended up, and Maynard left Taos and went back to San Francisco under a lot of financial strain. And it kind of led to a divorce. And unfortunately, heartbreakingly, the two children, aged 1 and 4, were shipped off to live with other families. Hold on 1 second. So she took to the streets, and this White Angel breadline picture is one of her breakthrough pieces that led her to be recognized as a documentary photographer. The other one is 1936. It's a plantation owner, overseer with his field hands. And in this work, she's able to capture the racial and economic injustices of the time. So she's, the same year that she does this, she had a show, and she actually earned a real title as a documentary photographer and was introduced to Paul Taylor, who would become her second husband, and he was an economist. Together, they became a real power couple, and they used his words and her lenses, and their first piece appeared in this magazine called Survey Graphic with Lange's photo on the cover. They were hired by the State Emergency Relief Administration and then the Federal Resettlement Authority, later the FSA, to travel across the country and photograph poverty. Her empathy, perhaps rooted in her own early traumas, allowed her to connect deeply with people. She said that her limp enabled her to approach people without them being fearful of her or anything, and get in close. And she was able to capture not just their hardship, but their human dignity. Her Migrant Mother series changed how American people thought about poverty, and it moved the needle on public policy. Now, in 1939, Lange and Taylor published The American Exodus, images and text documenting those displaced by the drought and economic collapse. In 1941, she made history as the first woman photographer to receive a Guggenheim Fellowship. And over the next decade, she would create photo essays for Life magazine and help found the prestigious Aperture Photography Collective. Between the years 1953 and 54, she collaborated with Edward Steichen on MoMA's Family of Man exhibit. 9 of her pictures are included in the show and in the book. Her work extended far beyond the U.S. Her and Taylor traveled to South Asia, the Middle East and South America, and she was always seeking the human story in her lens. And she also briefly taught at the California School of Fine Arts, mentoring a new generation. You can also see her work at the Oakland Museum. And okay, early 1940s, after Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the U.S. government actually hired Lange to the War Relocation Authority to document the forced internment of Japanese Americans. But her photos were so honest and so damning that they were impounded by the U.S. government for over 2 decades. These haunting images are a painful but vital record of racism by the U.S. government to its own citizens, and through them, Lange held a mirror to the nation. She always saw herself more as a journalist than an artist, and she wanted to use her craft to effect change. But there was definitely art and a formal quality in her work. And in her final year of life, she worked with MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, to prepare for a retrospective, the first for a woman photographer. But she died, unfortunately, in 1965 before the show opened. Though her work lives on and shapes generations of socially conscious photographers. So just as a sweet reflection, I want to say that like a scoop of ice cream on a hot summer day, Dorothy Lange's photographs melt into your mind. They're not just records, they're reminders of dignity, of struggle, of strength. Her lens caught not only the suffering, but the sweetness of survival. Let's go to the next artist. Yeah, Marta Magdalena Abakanowicz. She would be turning 95 on June 20th. She was born in Poland and lived through both Nazi occupation and later Soviet rule. She was trained in textile arts, but consistently pushed the limits of the state-mandated social realism. Her work ultimately gained global recognition and is now housed in major museums and public spaces worldwide. And for our ice cream celebration, we lift a cone of ciepłe lody. It's a nostalgic Polish treat from the communist era. It's called warm ice cream. It's an egg white mousse served in a waffle cone invented by the government nutritionists. So, born in 1930, she spent her childhood on a wooded estate outside Warsaw. Her lineage was quite noble. Her mother was from Polish nobility, and her father could trace his line all the way to Genghis Khan. At age 9, she experienced the terror of the German Nazi invasion, and her family retreated to the estate and joined the Polish resistance. At 14, she worked as a nurse's aide at a hospital tending to victims of the war. And she also witnessed soldiers attacking her mother and nearly severing her mother's arm at the shoulder, a trauma she would never forget. And it was these early encounters with violence, control, and dehumanization that would echo throughout her life's work. At 20, she entered the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw, but she had to hide her noble background to gain admission. And so she dropped the name Marta and lied, telling them she was the daughter of a clerk. So from then on, she's just known by Magdalena. She studied art during the height of social realism, and social realism is when art was stripped of any personal expression and made to serve propaganda. She said, "I like to draw," and the professor would come around with an eraser in his hand and rub out every unnecessary line. I hated him for it. So she was relegated to the tapestry department and forced to take up weaving. In secret, she painted these massive paintings of forest plants inspired by her childhood in the woods, just creating them for herself as an act of resistance. Then in 1956, Stalin dies, and there's a brief thaw, but there's some really good, subtle changes, meaningful changes. Artists could now travel, and small galleries could open up hosting little shows and poetry readings and stuff. And she had her first solo exhibit, her forest paintings and 4 tapestries. However, it was shut down before it could open to the public, considered frivolous and not of use to the community. Still, the exposure helped her, and she eventually was invited to join the first international tapestry biennials in Lausanne, Switzerland, which launched her international career. Her tapestries, large hanging textile forms, she started putting rods behind them to push them off the wall. They were sculptural yet soft, and they redefined the whole concept of what is sculpture. She transformed the classic wall tapestry into a form of spatial and environmental art. Suspended from the ceilings and towering up to 13 feet tall, these tapestries would envelop viewers like an organic womb-like space. And unbelievably, she wove each one by hand using natural fibers that she would scavenge through the city, often down at the docks, sisal rope, hemp, even horsehair, materials that she would rework with dyes. Now, these works were radical, ambiguous, powerful, and tactile. They couldn't easily be categorized, so critics called them Abakans after her name. And in 1969, the Abakans were included in MoMA's, Museum of Modern Art in New York, wall hanging exhibit, establishing her position as a significant artist. Critics there called her work disturbing, captivating, sexual, sensual, and audacious. In the 1970s and 80s, she shifted. She started creating armless human forms, hollow and made out of burlap, from burlap bags that were stiffened with resin. These works commented on the erasure of the individual in the totalitarian society. In alterations, the figures sit in a row, eerily alike and eerily absent, and they represent the crowd as a metaphor, passive, obedient, yet capable of violence or devotion. So these collective figures stood in contrast to the singularity of the Abakans and kind of suggest a growing urgency in Magdalena's work in social commentary. It was stunning that she was chosen to represent Poland at the 1980 Venice Biennial, and that marked a new peak in her recognition. She became a national hero and an international star. Okay, in Venice, the collector Giuliano Gori invited her to his Italian estate, where he commissioned her first permanent outdoor exhibition and her first work in bronze. So this led her in throughout the 80s and 90s. She would expand into materials like metal, stone, clay, and wood. She now found financial success and achieved stability. Her and her husband were able to acquire studios, and she became a faculty member at the Poznan State School of Plastic Arts, which has now been renamed in her honor. Magdalena was always courageous in her decisions. She never stopped searching. She rejected the conventional ways of thinking, and she was always looking for a new perspective. As she got on in life, she started worrying more about the planet and the fragility of the planet, and she wanted to do something about that. And when she was visiting a French steel mill in the later years, she encountered these discarded engine molds and transformed them into sarcophagi in glass houses, which you see in the upper left corner. And it's a poetic reflection on the ancient burial and nuclear danger. The piece is now permanently installed in Storm King Art Center in New York. And she wrote about the irony of the term sarcophagi. Sarcophagus meant to dissolve the flesh, but it's now used to contain radioactive threats like Chernobyl. Her work is held in major collections worldwide, including the Met, the Tate, Pompidou, Hirshhorn, and the Art Institute of Chicago. And if you're ever in Chicago, there is a massive installation called Agora that it consists of 106 9-foot tall cast iron figures, headless, that walk across Grant Park. She passed away in 2017, yet her influence continues. Magdalena transformed trauma into towering forms. She refused the erasure of her individuality, and she asserted a vision that was both haunting and deeply human. Her resilience, whether facing war, censorship, or the crowd, reminds us that art can be a quiet rebellion or a thunderous roar. So today, we celebrate our metaphorical cones of ice cream, warm ice cream, to Abakanowicz, whose soft sculptures held such fierce conviction. She didn't melt under pressure, she reshaped it. Yes. Judy, actually, on July 20th, it will be Judith Cohen, better known as Judy Chicago's birthday. She will turn 86 and she's still making art. So let's celebrate her with popsicles and frost clouds, which are a nod to her colored smoke and dry ice performances. So see, Judy challenged the macho land art of the 1960s when the men were using bulldozers to build spiral jetties and carve into volcanoes. She did these atmosphere performances that used pyrotechnics, colored dry ice, and erupting clouds of ephemeral smoke. These archives of her fireworks atmospheres they're 45 projects spanning 5 decades, were just recently acquired by the Nevada Museum of Art. Judy remains one of the most central and controversial figures in feminist art movement since the 1970s, never backing down from a fight for equity and visibility. I think of her as an art world popsicle. She's bold, she's bright, and she's melting boundaries. Born in Chicago in 1939, Judy came of age in a household shaped by Jewish tradition and leftist politics. Her father, actually in the line of 23 generations of rabbis, was a labor organizer and a communist. She was very, very close to him, and he died when she was 14 from ulceric tumors after being harassed by McCarthyism in the 1950s. She said, "My father taught me that it was my obligation to make a contribution to a better world, a mandate that has shaped my life and work, that and a deep commitment to equity for everyone who shares this planet." Now, Judy has always knew she wanted to be an artist, and in art school at UCLA, she realized that women were rarely taken seriously, so she aligned herself with her male peers. They called her Chicago. And in 1970, at age 31, she legally adopted the name Chicago, part defiance and part reinvention. And she staged this striking photo. I'm sorry it's so dark. Her gallerist is in the middle corner, sort of. It was for her her first solo show, to announce her solo show. And it was such a bold thing that Art Forum, the magazine, published the image for free. It was that bold. She said, "I had to fight for everything. I had to fight to be seen. I had to fight to be heard. I had to fight to be taken seriously." After college, Judy she went to automotive school and learned to paint with automotive paint, which was a medium that was well respected, needless to say, by the male art scene in California. And she was one woman in a class of 250 men. But she began to question, where were the women in art history? And inspired by scholars and peers like Linda Nochlin, she started researching the female figures left out of the canon. So her Great Lady series, their large, abstract, airbrushed images, coincided with her discovery of how the achievements of female figures in the past have often been excluded from historical narratives. These paintings honored women like Queen Victoria, Christine of Switzerland, Marie Antoinette, and Virginia Woolf. Judy painted the abstract motifs with biographical text. You can see the one on the right has writing around the corner, and that's from Marie Antoinette. And she wrote a story of how Marie Antoinette's era saw women artists thrive until the French Revolution erased their visibility and cut off her head. Judy gradually shifted towards mediums seen as women's work, like embroidery, needlework, and china painting. And she deliberately reclaimed these mediums as powerful forms of feminist expression. Her vision was to honor and affirm the female experience as central to the human story. But men perceived her feminist agenda and her outspoken manner as hostile and aggressive, and this made her a target for dismissal. Judy broke patriarchal art world boundaries, both as an artist and as an educator. In the early 1970s, while teaching at Cal Arts, she co-founded the feminist art program with Miriam Shapiro. It's very fascinating. Something definitely, if you haven't heard about, you have to go research. Together with their students, they transformed an abandoned Hollywood mansion into a woman house, a landmark collective art installation. Now, each room, the women came and worked throughout the course, the semester. They redid the whole house. They transformed it, and each room challenged stereotypes about women and showed different female experiences, from the kitchen to the bedroom to the bathroom. Judy's infamous print, Red Flag, 1971, it's a stark photolithograph of a bloody tampon, shocked the public. It signaled that even the most common aspect of a woman's life has been absent from the mainstream art. She and her students were bringing taboo and honesty to the forefront of art. But the Woman House, seen as revolutionary, funny, controversial, and raw, was completely unapologetic. It sparked a wave of consciousness raising, but it also provoked a strong backlash and censorship that would follow Judy for decades. Definitely, I could go more and more on that. But this is the dinner party from 1979, and it's her most iconic work. It was a monumental installation celebrating 1,038 women from history. It was a participatory art-making project using workers from across the country who contributed their skills in needlepoint, beadwork, china painting, and they created the vibrant pieces that Judy Chicago envisioned. It's a giant, massive triangular table. It has 39 ornate place settings honoring powerful women from history and mythology. The settings include placemats, napkins, gold chalices, utensils, and china-painted porcelain plates with a central design that is based on women's genitals and butterflies, each symbolizing the woman being honored. It's set on this heritage floor, which is painted tiles with gold inscribed letters of 998 more names: female midwives, poets, pharaohs, scientists. The installation elevates embroidery, ceramics, and collaborative labor to the realm of high art. And these were techniques usually excluded from fine art institutions. The project redefine what counted as serious art and who gets remembered. A national tour was planned, and despite overwhelming public enthusiasm, the museum goers in San Francisco had to wait 5 hours to get in. In Seattle, the curator, Charles Coles, dismissed it as a political project made by a group of students. He offered Judy space in the Science Museum instead. And when Chicago refused, the scheduled national tour was derailed by the backlash. Museums balked and canceled. Critics dismissed and derided it as vaginas on plates. Politicians weighed in, saying that it was ceramic porn. And feminists even spoke out against it, regretting that it was not more inclusive. It was at this point, actually, that Judy thought about suicide. She retreated to the country and wrote and put together a book about this. The table did continue traveling for a few years. It went to some college campuses and art festivals in 6 different countries in 15 cities and proved very popular. Crowds always lining up for it, which ironically made the art world dismiss it further. It took years and the patronage of Elizabeth A. Sackler to get the dinner party out of storage and secure it a permanent home at the Brooklyn Museum, where it now inspires millions. Today, the dinner party is one of the most celebrated feminist artworks of all time. So Judy continues to make art and write and teach. She asks, how do we build history that includes all of us? She once said, I'm trying to make art that relates to the human experience, not just the male experience. Her lifelong fight for visibility, inclusion, and emotional honesty make her an enduring figure in the art world. Like Magdalena Abakanowicz, she refused to shrink from censorship or gender dismissal or personal grief. Instead, she expanded what was possible, not just in materials and subjects, but in spirit. So yes, we scream for ice cream, but we also scream for these artists who turned their struggles into radical acts of imagination. 5 creative women, 5 scoops of vision under pressure. They endured regimes, war, censorship, and still they never stopped making. So there we go. Let's raise our cones to Judy, Magdalena, Tamara, Dorothy, and Catherine. These women are art goddesses, yes, but they're also fully human. Judy Chicago continues to ask, should she retreat into her personal work or stay the course, trying to create art that centers the female perspective? Dorothea Lange quietly wondered whether her photography was art and whether it sparked the social change she hoped for. Magdalena aimed beyond the human conflict toward healing the planet itself. And Tamara and Catherine, they both used art to shape identity, personal, cultural, and national. Their visions were not mirrors, they were hammers. Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it, wrote Bertolt Brecht. We must persevere. We must keep shaping. There's so much to do. And I ask you, please go deeper into the histories of these 5 women and share what you find. Witness the creative resilience yourself. Widen the human story. And thank you, truly, for joining me today. Thank you, Bibiana.